Imagine this. You're walking into a crowded room.
Oh, boy.
Right. Maybe it's a massive industry networking event, or a friend of a friend's birthday party, or honestly, even just a bustling coffee shop in a new city.
Mm-hmm.
You look around, you scan the faces, and you don't know a single soul.
Just completely blank faces everywhere.
Exactly. And for a lot of us, just visualizing that scenario is enough to make our heart rate spike. But now I want you to layer something else on top of it.
Yeah?
Imagine that the language echoing around that room, the language everyone is just speaking so effortlessly, isn't your native language.
Right. Yes.
You're an English learner and you're operating at that, that solid B2 level. You know the grammar. You have a pretty decent vocabulary locked away in your brain somewhere. But now you have to actually use it in real time with complete strangers. Let's talk about you for a second.
Yeah, do that.
Because, listen, you are a B2 level English learner. You've studied the grammar.
You've put in the hours.
Exactly. You've memorized the vocabulary lists. You can watch movies in English and, understand the vast majority of what's going on.
Right.
You are an intelligent adult. You're capable of complex thought, probably working as a professional or studying at a university somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But there is this specific, very common, and frankly, deeply frustrating barrier that you might be hitting right now.
It's the freeze.
It's the freeze. It's that moment when you step out your front door, you lock eyes with a stranger, maybe you're at a coffee shop or waiting in line for a bus, and you realize you have the perfect opportunity to speak.
But you don't.
You don't. Instead of saying a simple hello, your brain just completely freezes. You worry about your accent.
You worry about using the wrong preposition.
Yeah, or you worry that you'll sound, less intelligent than you actually are.
Which is such a common fear.
It is, and before you know it, the moment has passed and you're walking away in silence, beating yourself up about it.
Exactly. It can feel absolutely terrifying. It really can. And it's a completely universal challenge. I mean, when you're learning a language, there's this massive, intimidating gap between studying from a textbook in a quiet room and actually deploying those skills in the wild.
For sure.
You might have aced your vocabulary quizzes, but the second a stranger makes eye contact with you by the snack table, your mind it goes completely blank.
Just a dial-up tone in your head.
Exactly. It's like your brain hits a brick wall. But what if you could walk into that room and feel completely at ease?
That would be the dream.
Right. What if you knew exactly how to start, how to keep things flowing, and just as importantly, how to gracefully leave?
Well, that is exactly what we're going to tackle today.
And here's the crucial psychological shift for B2 learners.
What is it?
Your intention should be connection, not perfection.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If I'm a language learner, I do want to be perfect. If I don't focus on my grammar, aren't people just going to judge me? I mean, won't I look foolish?
That is the exact fear that paralyzes people. But think about it from the native speaker's perspective. When you go into a conversation thinking your ultimate goal is to speak flawless, textbook English without a single grammatical error, you're setting yourself up for an internal panic attack.
Yeah, you freeze up.
Exactly. Your cognitive load, which is basically your brain's available RAM, is entirely focused on the mechanics of the language.
Like processing power.
Right.
Right.
If 90% of your brain's computing power is desperately trying to remember the past participle of an irregular verb, you only have 10% left to actually listen to the human being standing right in front of you.
So you're basically buffering.
Yes.
You're staring at them, but your eyes are glazed over because you're running complex calculations in your head.
Exactly. You look like a robot.
Yeah.
But if your pre-production goal is simply to connect, to show genuine interest, and to share a brief human moment, that pressure just completely evaporates.
That makes sense.
And the Leiden Guide actually gives specific script writing advice that works perfectly to lower this cognitive load. They advise audio creators to keep things incredibly simple. There's this temptation to dress up text in long, complicated $50 words to sound smart. But Leiden recommends concentrating on simple concepts that can be grasped immediately. In fact, their golden rule for writing a script is to target sentences that are around 10 words long.
Wait, 10 words?
Yeah, 10 words and avoiding excessive commas.
But if I only speak in 10-word sentences, won't I sound like a toddler? How do you balance keeping it simple without sounding completely unnatural?
It's a great question. You don't have to literally count your words, but the spirit of the 10-word rule is absolute gold for a B2 learner.
How so?
If you try to construct a massive winding sentence with multiple dependent clauses like Although I usually prefer to take the train, seeing as the weather was so inclement, I decided
You're in a stumble.
you're going to stumble, you'll lose your train of thought, you'll panic, and the listener will get totally lost.
Right.
But if you stick to short, active sentences, I usually take the train. But the weather was terrible today, so I drove instead. You're infinitely easier to understand.
Yeah, that flows much better.
The Leiden Guide also stresses using active language and speaking in the present tense whenever possible. Active present tense sentences are the easiest for the brain to process, both for the person speaking and the person listening.
That makes a lot of sense. It actually reminds me of the advice from our AI Talk English source.
Oh yeah, what do they say?
They point out that when you see a random person and want to talk, that initial spike of fear is completely normal biology. Your heart goes thump, thump, thump.
The classic fight-or-flight response.
Exactly, it's kicking in. But they emphasize that you don't need perfect grammar to survive that moment. You just need clear words and confidence. Even if your English is quote-unquote broken, people usually understand the context of what you want to say.
Absolutely.
Most strangers aren't sitting there with a red pen grading you. They're just normal people going about their day.
And that fear of the stranger is deeply ingrained in us, especially as adults in modern society. We often look down to avoid eye contact on the subway. We pretend we don't see people. We put our headphones in.
Definitely guilty of that.
The source from Talk to Canada highlights this exact phenomenon of urban isolation. But they also counter it with a really beautiful quote from the legendary cellist Yo-Yo Ma.
Oh, what was the quote?
He said, "Good things happen when you meet strangers."
It's a great sentiment. And to actually prove that point, the Talk to Canada source shared this brilliant, slightly crazy anecdote about a social experiment.
The soul pancake one.
Yes, conducted by a media company called Soul Pancake. They wanted to show people how to make friends with strangers, so they did something completely unexpected. They went out to a busy, gray, concrete public space and set up a massive outdoor ball pit.
Like the plastic ball pits you see at a children's fast food playground.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
A giant, colorful ball pit right out in the middle of a public plaza. And they simply had signs inviting adult strangers to take a seat inside the pit and make a friend.
That is wild.
Now, your first instinct might be, oh, only massive extroverts would ever jump into a public ball pit. And sure, it takes a bit of bravery. To help them out, the plastic balls actually had conversation starters written right on them.
Oh, that's clever.
But the core takeaway from observing these adults interacting is profound. Confidence grows through interaction, not preparation. You can't study your way out of being shy in your bedroom. Eventually, you just have to get into the ball pit.
I love that visualization.
Yeah.
Getting into the ball pit is the physical manifestation of projecting openness. And that brings us to the crucial non-verbal cues discussed in our source.
Right, before you even speak.
Before you even use your carefully constructed 10-word sentence, your body language is speaking volumes. The Talk to Canada source breaks this down clearly. You need a warm smile. You need to maintain gentle eye contact, not a creepy stare, but friendly contact.
No glaring.
Right. You need to lean forward slightly to show interest. And importantly, you need to stand or sit with open body language.
So no crossed arms, no hiding behind your phone.
Precisely. If you project approachability with your body, the exact English vocabulary you use matters far less. You're already communicating that you're friendly, safe, and open to connection. This raises an important question, though. Once you have your mindset right, you've accepted that connection is better than perfection, and your body language is open.
Yeah.
How do you actually initiate that very first verbal interaction?
How to break the ice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do we transition from the pre-production phase into the actual recording, so to speak?
Well, in the Leiden podcast guide, this would be the opening of the script. In a podcast, the opening have to immediately establish relevance. You have to answer why the listener should care right now in the first 30 seconds.
Mhm.
In the context of small talk, this translates to the fine art of the icebreaker. You need something simple, immediate, and relevant to the shared environment. And our sources give us some amazing real-world examples of how to do this without sounding like a creep.
Which is always the goal.
Always. Let's look at the transcript from the Mr. English channel. There's a story shared by one of the hosts, Paul. He was sitting on a park bench, and a stranger sat down near him with a small white dog. Paul said the dog looked like a little cloud. Paul wanted to practice his English, but he had that terrifying moment of hesitation. What do I say? So what did he use as his opening? A simple compliment. He just looked at the dog and said, "What a beautiful dog. He is so cute."
Let's really unpack why that specific compliment works so beautifully as an icebreaker, especially for a B2 learner. First of all, grammatically, it's incredibly simple.
Yeah.
You aren't risking a massive structural failure.
Right.
Second, and more importantly from a psychological standpoint, compliments instantly lower the other person's social defenses. But notice what he complimented.
He didn't compliment the guy's physical appearance. He complimented the dog.
Exactly. If you walk up to a stranger and say, "You have beautiful eyes," that can be incredibly jarring or entirely inappropriate depending on the context.
That
But when you compliment something external that someone cares about, like their pet or a book they're holding in, makes them feel validated and proud without feeling threatened. In the story, the stranger, Mark, immediately smiled, his defenses dropped, and he offered the dog's name, Buster. The ice was completely broken with 8 simple words.
And it doesn't just work in parks with fluffy dogs. The sources give another highly practical example for an office break room or a university kitchen.
A microwave scenario.
Yes, you're standing there waiting for the microwave to beep, the silence is awkward, and someone walks in with their Tupperware. You can simply say, "Is that your lunch? It smells
That's
delicious."
so easy.
Again, it's an external compliment, it's present tense, and it's universally relatable. Everyone loves to hear that their food smells good.
It's a fantastic strategy. Another highly effective opening move, alongside the external compliment, is the situational comment. You basically just comment on the shared reality you are both experiencing in that exact physical moment. This creates instant solidarity.
Emily's story is the perfect example of this. She was at the grocery store, specifically standing in the bread section looking for a good sourdough.
Okay.
There was another woman standing next to her, looking totally overwhelmed by all the different artisanal options. Emily didn't walk up, extend her hand, and do a formal robotic introduction like, "Hello, my name is Emily. How are you today?"
That would be weird in a supermarket.
Super weird. Instead, she just stood there looking at the same shelf and said, "The bread here is so good, but it's hard to choose right."
That is incredibly strategic social maneuvering. By pointing out a shared minor struggle, the paradox of choice in the bakery aisle, she instantly aligned herself with the stranger.
They're on the same team now.
Exactly. They aren't two isolated shoppers ignoring each other anymore. They're suddenly a team trying to solve the puzzle of which sourdough is the freshest. The stranger immediately agreed, laughed, and said she wanted something for sandwiches, but didn't know which was best. Emily gave it a recommendation, and only then, after the rapport was built, did she introduce herself. She established relevance first, just like a good audio introduction.
Now, while situational comments and external compliments are incredibly safe bets, our sources also provide strict, flashing red light warnings about what not to say.
The taboos.
Yes, the EF English Live Guide explicitly outlines safe topics versus taboo topics. Safe topics are the classics. The weather saying it's hot today, isn't it? Is a cliche for a reason, it works. Or general location questions like, is this your first trip to New York? Or asking about jobs, what do you do for a living?
But those taboo topics are critical to avoid because they can instantly ruin the rapport you're desperately trying to build.
What are the big ones?
Well, EF English Live warns heavily against bringing up politics or religion. Those are highly polarizing and can turn a friendly chat into a debate in seconds. But beyond the obvious ones, there are subtle cultural taboos in English-speaking environments that might surprise learners.
Like what?
For instance, you should never ask an adult their age. You should never ask about their salary, what they pay in rent, or how much money they earn.
And here's a massive one that trips people up, commenting on weight or physical appearance in a way that could be misinterpreted.
Oh, this is a minefield.
The source specifically points out that asking, have you put on weight, or even have you lost weight, can be a terrible icebreaker. Now, in some cultures, noting that someone has gained a little weight might be intended as an observation of health, prosperity, or success.
Right, it might be meant as a compliment.
But in an English-speaking office in London or New York, it is deeply offensive. You might think you're being friendly, but you're actually causing massive embarrassment and instantly killing the conversation.
That cultural mismatch is exactly why the situational comments or the external compliments, the dog, the lunch, the confusing bread aisle, are so much safer. You're focusing the attention outward onto a shared object rather than making personal, potentially intrusive observations about their body or life.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Once you've successfully broken the ice with a safe, simple opening, how do you build a natural rhythm?
Yeah.
You can't just talk about the weather for 20 minutes.
True.
This is where we look at one of the most powerful yet absolutely intimidating tools for an English learner. Humor.
Humor is widely considered the final frontier of language fluency. When you're learning a language, you usually understand the literal dictionary meaning of words long before you ever grasp the cultural nuances, the sarcasm, or the wordplay.
Yeah, jokes rarely translate directly.
Exactly. But our source from the blog Yak Yacker argues something fascinating. They claim that humor isn't just a reward for becoming fluent, it's actually a superpower for ESL learners to get there faster. They call jokes tiny, real English workouts.
I really love that concept. The author of the Yak Yacker piece shares a true story about telling an English pun to a classroom of learners. At first, the author just got polite, confused smiles.
Crickets.
But then, the teacher explained one tiny word, the hinge of the joke. And suddenly, the whole room let out this collective laugh. The author describes it as half amusement and half pure relief.
That oh moment is pure cognitive magic.
Yeah.
It's the moment when the learner's brain successfully connects a double meaning at high speed, just like it needs to in a real fast-paced conversation.
Clicks.
Right, and that's exactly why jokes are such effective training tools. They force your brain to notice those double meanings, to recognize common phrasings, and to feel the natural shapes of English sentences. Furthermore, comedy relies entirely on rhythm.
Timing is everything.
When you practice telling a joke, you're actually practicing the musical timing of English speech. You have to pause just a beat before the punchline. When your timing improves through practicing jokes, your everyday, non-joking English sounds remarkably smoother and more natural.
Let's actually walk through some of these beginner jokes from the Yak Yacker source to see how this works in practice. These are built on very simple English vocabulary but have a big payoff. Let me try one on you.
Okay, hit me.
Why did the tomato turn red?
I don't know why.
Because it saw the salad dressing.
Oh, man. Okay, it's a terrible dad joke, but for a B2 learner, the workout here is fantastic.
Break it down for us.
The joke hinges entirely on the double meaning of the word dressing. In one context, it means the vinaigrette or sauce you pour on a salad. But dressing also means the physical act of putting on clothes. So the tomato blushed red because it accidentally saw the salad getting dressed. It trains the language learner's brain to hold two completely different definitions of a single word simultaneously without panicking.
Let's do another one. This one relies on phonetics and casual speech. What do you call cheese that isn't yours?
Nacho cheese.
This one is a brilliant exercise in pronunciation and connected speech. In a textbook, you read the words not your distinctly. But in casual, fast, real-world English speech, those two words blend together. The T and the your merge to create a chi sound.
Right, nacho. Exactly. Not your sounds exactly like nacho, like the tortilla chips.
Weird.
Not your cheese becomes nacho cheese. By understanding this joke, a learner is tuning their ear to how native speakers actually blend words in the wild, which is a huge hurdle for listening comprehension.
And it's great for vocabulary building, too. Try this one. What do you call a sleeping bull?
Tell me.
A bulldozer.
Right, so you have the visual of the heavy construction machine, a bulldozer. But the joke teaches the specific vocabulary word doze, which means to sleep lightly or take a nap. A bull that dozes is a bulldozer. It's an incredibly memorable visual way to lock that specific vocabulary word into your long-term memory.
As learners advance to intermediate and advanced jokes, the Yak Yacker source shows how the wordplay gets into idioms and common business expressions. For example, listen to this one. I used to be a banker, but I lost interest.
The dual meaning here is fantastic for a professional context. Interest can mean personal curiosity or passion for a subject, but in the banking world, interest is the money earned on a loan or investment. So the phrase, I lost interest, is a highly useful everyday sentence. The learner can essentially steal that exact sentence and use it in real life when talking about an old hobby. I used to play guitar, but I lost interest while also understanding the financial pun.
That idea of stealing lines from jokes is such a great actionable tip from that source. They say, even if you don't feel confident enough to tell the whole joke at a party, you can extract a natural, grammatically perfect sentence pattern and use it.
Exactly.
Here's an advanced one that uses a really common idiom. I have a fear of speed bumps, but I'm slowly getting over it.
This one perfectly unpacks the idiom getting over it. In casual conversational English, to get over something means to move past an emotional problem, a phobia, or a hurdle. But literally, when you're driving a car, you have to physically drive your vehicle over a speed bump in the road. The joke hinges on the tension between the figurative emotional idiom and the literal physical action.
And humor isn't just about telling structured, set-up punchline jokes. Our source from Let's Roam highlights how riddles can actually function as fantastic, slightly cheeky icebreakers.
How so?
For instance, they suggest walking up to a group and asking, "How much does a polar bear weigh?" And when they look confused, you smile and say, "Enough to break the ice." Hi, I'm...
That's classic meta-humor.
Yeah.
You're openly acknowledging the inherent awkwardness of starting a conversation with a stranger. You're calling out the fact that you're actively trying to break the ice, but you're using a clever, cheesy riddle to do it. It shows intense self-awareness and immediately lightens the mood of the group.
But the Yak Yacker source also gives some crucial warnings about mistakes to avoid when deploying humor. First, don't choose jokes that are heavily reliant on highly localized slang. Start simple.
Definitely.
Second, if a joke falls flat, which happens to native speakers all the time, don't desperately try to over-explain every single word of the joke to make them laugh. Just quickly point out the one word that creates the twist and move on.
Over-explaining kills it.
And finally, if you forget the rhythm, if you just rush through the joke without that crucial 1-second pause before the punchline, it won't work. Timing really is everything.
And importantly, if the joke fails entirely, if you deliver the punchline and there's just dead silence. The Yak Yacker author provides a brilliant, bulletproof recovery line you can steal. You just smile, shrug, and say, okay, well, that sounded a lot funnier in my head.
I love that line.
It's self-deprecating. It shows you don't take yourself too seriously. And honestly, that recovery line often gets a bigger, genuine laugh than the actual joke would have.
We've talked about the mechanics of a good joke, but if we connect this to the bigger picture of overall conversation flow, humor is just one tool to keep things moving. What happens when the laughing stops?
The middle phase.
Once you've broken the ice and established a rhythm with some light humor or observations, you're officially in the middle of the conversation. You've passed the intro music of the podcast, and now you're deep into the core content. How do you maintain that flow without it feeling forced or running out of things to say?
The transcript from Mr. English Channel uses a perfect physical metaphor for this. They describe a good conversation as a game of catch. You throw the ball, the other person catches it, they hold it for a second, and they throw it back.
Simple enough.
Right, but if you only talk about yourself, your job, your opinions, you're hogging the ball. The other person is just standing there. Conversely, if you only ask them rapid-fire questions without ever sharing anything about yourself, you're forcing them to do all the throwing. It's exhausting. You need a steady rhythm of give and take.
To keep that ball in the air smoothly, the Learn English source emphasizes the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of using open-ended questions.
This is vital. If you ask a stranger a closed question, like, do you like art? They can just say yes, and boom, the conversation instantly dies.
The ball hits the floor.
Exactly. You have to awkwardly scramble to pick it back up. But if you ask an open-ended question like, what kind of art are you usually drawn to? Or have you ever tried creating your own artwork? You force them to give a detailed narrative response. You give them a big, easy ball to catch.
The Mr. English channel gives a great example of this for everyday small talk. Think about how we usually meet people. We ask rapid-fire interview-style questions. What is your job? Where do you live? How many brothers do you have?
It's an interrogation.
It totally is. You're basically demanding data from them. Instead, you ask a broad, open question like, so what do you usually do for fun on the weekends? They might say they like hiking or trying new restaurants or watching old movies, and that is when you can deploy the ultimate conversational weapon.
The Me Too moment.
Yes, the magic phrase of instant friendship. Let's go back to Emily and the stranger in the bread aisle. They were talking about cooking, and the stranger casually mentioned she loved making Italian food at home. Emily didn't just nod and ask another question.
What did she do?
She immediately lit up and said, "Wow, me too. I'm actually obsessed with making fresh pasta." That tiny two-word phrase changes the entire dynamic of the room. You're no longer two strangers awkwardly passing time. You're two people who share a specific bond over pasta.
Psychologically, Me Too is incredibly powerful. As human beings, we're constantly scanning our environment for safety and tribal belonging. When someone says Me Too, it signals we are the same. We share a tribe.
It builds trust.
And when you find that common ground, the conversation flows effortlessly because you're now exploring a shared passion rather than frantically searching your brain for random safe topics.
But to find that Me Too moment, you have to actually be paying attention. Both Learn English and AI Talk English stress that listening is an active sport. If you're a B2 learner, there's a huge temptation to stand there silently translating your next sentence in your head while the other person is talking.
Oh, totally.
You aren't listening. You're just waiting for your turn to perform.
And people can tell when you're doing that. Active listening requires physical and verbal cues. The sources suggest nodding your head, maintaining that eye contact, and using small conversational sounds.
Mm.
Say, anger or phrases like AC. That's cool.
Mm.
This proves to the speaker that you're engaged with their current thought. And if you're worried about needing time to translate or formulate your next thought, the AI Talk English source offers a brilliant relieving piece of advice. A short pause is completely normal.
Right. You don't need to feel awkward if there's a 2 or 3 second silence. You don't have to fill every gap. You can even vocalize your thought process by saying, let me think for a moment. It shows you're taking their words seriously and formulating a thoughtful response rather than just panicking and blurting something out.
And speaking of panicking, the sources are full of reminders that making mistakes is not the end of the world. In fact, making a mistake can actually accelerate the friendship.
The bat story from Paul on the Mr. English channel is the ultimate proof of this. Let's talk about the dread of this moment because every language learner has been there.
Oh, the dread is real.
You use a word, the native speaker gives you that slightly confused head tilt, and your stomach drops. You realize you've messed up. So Paul was at a party and met a girl named Anna. She told him, "I really like bats." Now, Paul immediately thought of the flying mammals that live in caves and come out at night. So he replied, "Wow, that is unusual. I think they are a bit scary, but they are cool." Anna looked at him like he was completely unhinged and said, "Scary? Why is a piece of wood scary?"
Because she wasn't talking about Dracula, she was talking about baseball bats.
Exactly. It was a massive, hilarious vocabulary misunderstanding. Paul felt incredibly silly in that moment. His instinct was probably to apologize profusely and run away, but instead of letting it ruin the chat, they ended up laughing hysterically about it for 5 minutes.
That's amazing.
That awkward mistake instantly became an inside joke, a shared memory. The source notes that Anna is still one of Paul's best friends today, all because of that silly misunderstanding about flying mammals.
This proves what the Talk to Canada source states so clearly. Laughing at your own mistakes makes you deeply relatable and human. Perfection is actually quite intimidating. Vulnerability is magnetic. Yeah. Even when Paul accidentally kicked his cup of tea and spilled it all over his own shoes during his conversation with Mark at the park, he didn't have a meltdown. He just laughed at himself and said, "Well, I'm a bit clumsy today." It showed he wasn't trying to be an impossibly perfect, slick person. Vulnerability builds trust much, much faster than flawless grammar ever could.
Navigating these dynamics gets a little more complex when you're dealing with a group, rather than a simple one-on-one. The Learn English source gives some great tactical advice for joining group conversations without being disruptive.
What's their strategy?
They say you should hover and observe first. Get a sense of the topic and the emotional tone. Are they joking? Are they complaining? And when you want to jump in, use a connecting phrase to validate what was just said before introducing your own point. For example, that's an interesting point, Jake. It actually reminds me of.
That specific phrase does dual duty. It flatters Jake by acknowledging that his contribution was valuable, and it smoothly inserts your own perspective without feeling like you're hijacking the conversation.
It's seamless.
And if you need to disagree in a group setting, which is totally fine, you do it respectfully. You don't just bluntly say you're wrong, which can cause someone to lose face. You say, "I see where you're coming from, but have you considered?" It keeps the atmosphere positive, collaborative, and safe.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, maintaining a great deep flow in the middle of a conversation is wonderful. You've broken the ice, you've found the Me Too moment, you're actively listening. But doing all of that successfully creates a brand new, terrifying problem.
Getting out.
Yes. How do you eventually end it? If you've built great rapport with someone, you don't want to ruin it by awkwardly looking at your watch, muttering an excuse, and running away. You also don't want to be held hostage in a conversation for 45 minutes just because you're too polite to leave.
Exactly. The ending of the conversation is just as critical as the opening. In our podcast, Metaphor from Leiden, this is the outro. You need to wrap things up, summarize the value of the time you spent, and leave the listener, or in this case, your new acquaintance, feeling good about the interaction. A bad exit can completely sour a great conversation.
This brings us to the absolutely masterful article by Farley Ledgerwood titled 9 Ways to End Conversations Politely That Socially Aware People Have Mastered. Ledgerwood isn't a linguist. She spent 35 years working in an insurance office.
That's a lot of small talk.
That means he has had to navigate thousands of lengthy, boring, potentially trapping conversations by the water cooler. His core philosophy is incredibly empathetic, Ending a conversation well isn't about aggressively cutting people off. It's about respecting both your time and theirs while actively preserving the relationship for the future.
Ledgerwood outlines several highly effective strategies, and they are incredibly useful for English learners because they rely on specific, easily memorizable sentence structures. You don't have to invent an exit on the fly. You just deploy a strategy. Let's break down the most powerful ones.
Strategy number one is Ledgerwood's absolute go-to move, the positive summary close. You basically summarize the conversation with genuine enthusiasm and then signal that it has reached its natural logical end. His textbook example is, this has been really helpful. I really love your perspective on remote work.
Psychologically, this is brilliant. Why does it work so well? Because the deepest human desire in any conversation is to feel truly heard.
Yeah, everyone wants that.
By summarizing a specific point they made their perspective on remote work or their opinion on that sourdough bread, you provide concrete proof that you are actively listening to them. You validate their contribution to your day. It definitively signals a conclusion, but the person walks away feeling valued and smart, even though you are the one orchestrating the exit.
Strategy number two is the universally understood out, the bathroom excuse. Ledgerwood suggests a simple, polite, "Would you excuse me for a moment? I need to find the restroom." It works flawlessly because absolutely nobody is going to argue with your biological needs. You don't have to explain yourself.
It's true, but he includes a crucial, somewhat funny warning with this one. Don't overuse it with the same people at a single party.
Good point.
If you excuse yourself to the restroom 5 times in 2 hours to escape conversations, people are going to start worrying about your bladder health. It's an emergency exit cord, not a standard operating procedure for every chat.
Fair point. Strategy number three is the future commitment. You say something like, "Let's definitely continue this over coffee next week," or "We should grab lunch and keep talking about this." This is a great way to exit because it flatters them. It shows you value the relationship enough to want to keep it going, just not right this exact second. But Ledgerwood adds a massive culturally vital caveat here.
Yes, this is a huge trap for language learners. He says you must only use this strategy if you actually literally mean it. Empty promises will destroy your credibility faster than an abrupt goodbye. This is a fascinating cultural note.
Why is that?
In some cultures, offering a future meeting or inviting someone to your home is merely a polite fiction. It's just a culturally accepted way of saying a warm goodbye, and nobody expects you to follow through. But in many English-speaking cultures, especially in business, if you say, "Let's get coffee next week," the other person might actually pull out their phone and expect a calendar invite.
Yeah.
If you don't follow up, you look unreliable, so use it wisely.
Strategy number four is my absolute favorite because it is so incredibly smooth. It's the introduction redirect. Imagine you're at a networking event, you've been talking to a guy named Tom for 10 minutes, and you really need to move on and meet other people.
Okay.
You look around, you spot a colleague or an acquaintance, you grab them and you say, "Tom, oh, you have to meet Sarah. She's actually working on something really similar to what you were just talking about. Let me introduce you to."
This is a high-level, masterclass social maneuver. Think about what you're doing here. You're turning yourself into a high-value connector. You provide immense value to Tom by expanding his network. You provide value to Sarah by bringing her into a warm conversation. And, most importantly, you seamlessly free yourself up to leave the interaction. You've passed the baton. It's a win-win-win scenario, and nobody feels rejected.
Strategies 5 and 6 are about radical sincerity and action. There's the honest time constraint where you simply tell the truth. "I'd love to keep chatting, but I promised my daughter I'd pick her up at 3, or I really need to go catch my train." Then there's the task transition, where you say, "I'm going to go implement what we just discussed," or "I'm going to go grab another drink." Ledgerwood notes that people highly respect honest boundaries and action-oriented exits. You don't need to invent a fake emergency.
And we can tie this all back to the Mr. English Channel transcript for one final beautiful touch on the exit. When Emily finally left the stranger in the bread aisle after their chat about Italian food, she didn't just abruptly say, "Nice to meet you, bye." She added a tiny tag to the end. "It was really nice talking to you. I hope to see you here again."
Leaving the door open.
Exactly. She left the door open. She planted a seed for the future. And because of that lingering warmth, when she saw that same woman again the very next day, they weren't strangers anymore. They easily picked up the conversation and became friends.
So what does this all mean? We've gone on quite an expensive journey today. We started by completely rethinking the pre-production mindset, the liberating idea that you have to prioritize human connection over grammatical perfection, consciously letting go of that fear that makes your heart thump in your chest. We learned how to bravely step into the ball pit of social interaction using simple, low-pressure icebreakers like external compliments and situational observations.
We then explored how to build a natural rhythm and timing, using the unexpected superpower of English humor, training our brains with puns and riddles. We saw how to keep the ball in the air during the messy middle of the conversation by relying on open-ended questions, practicing active listening, and hunting for that magical, tribal, Me Too moment of shared interest. And we learned that vulnerability is a strength. Even spilling tea on your shoes or confusing baseball with Dracula's flying mammals can actually help you build a much stronger bond.
Finally, we mastered the delicate art of the graceful exit, using Ledgerwood's tools like the positive summary close and the introduction redirect to validate and value the other person's time while firmly protecting our own.
And as we finally wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring us back to that Leiden University source one last time. We used their guidelines for creating an educational audio project as a metaphor for structuring a conversation. But the guide had one specific academic section that is truly profound if you apply it to real life.
What was it?
They discussed a concept called active pedagogy through student-generated podcasts. Let's define that. Active pedagogy basically means learning by doing. It's the difference between reading the manual for a Lego set versus dumping the books on the floor and trying to build it yourself. Yeah. They noted that when students are asked to create their own audio projects, it promotes the highest possible level of deep understanding and problem solving. It forces them to collaborate, to negotiate meaning, and to create a narrative together.
Okay, I see where you're going with this, and I love it.
What if you applied that exact philosophy of active pedagogy to your social life? What if you stopped viewing every interaction with a stranger as a terrifying, high-pressure pass-or-fail test of your B2 English vocabulary? Instead, what if you viewed every single conversation you have as a live, student-generated audio project?
That reframes everything.
Every stranger you meet at a party, in a crowded coffee shop, or staring confused at sourdough in the bread aisle is just a fascinating, slightly unpredictable co-host you haven't recorded with yet. You aren't taking an exam. You are actively co-creating a story in real time. How might viewing your daily social life as an ongoing, collaborative audio production completely eliminate your fear of speaking up?
That's an incredible, empowering way to look at it. You are the producer, the host, and the editor of your own social life. You just have to hit record, step up to the mic, and start talking.
Okay, let's set the scene to make this really concrete for you. Picture yourself in a super relatable everyday scenario. You're standing in a long line at a coffee shop. Or maybe you're at a crowded networking event, or literally just sitting on a bench in a public park.
Yeah.
And you make eye contact with a stranger.
The classic setup.
Right. And an observation pops into your head. Maybe something about the torrential rain outside, or a thought about the pastry display. You genuinely want to speak. You really want to practice your English and make a connection.
Yeah.
But the moment you open your mouth, your brain just hits a wall. Your amygdala fires up, your heart rate increases, and you suddenly feel like you have forgotten every single English word you have ever learned.
Total blank.
Total blank. So what do? You look down at your phone, you pretend to read an important email, and the moment just evaporates.
And most language learners have a really visceral memory of that exact feeling. It's basically a form of social paralysis.
Yeah.
But the underlying issue there isn't a lack of vocabulary. It's a massive spike in cognitive load mixed with a really intense fear of judgment.
And today we are going to unpack the tools to bypass that paralysis. We're going to discuss the Me Too reflex. We'll look at how to use humor to disarm both yourself and the listener.
And perhaps most importantly, we are going to give you specific, proven phrases to safely exit a conversation when you feel out of your depth.
Let's start by looking at that stranger you're so afraid of talking to.
Yeah.
Because before we even get to the mechanics of speaking, we really have to address the mindset.
We do.
The anxiety we feel in that coffee shop line is almost entirely self-imposed. It's driven by assumptions we make about the other person. There's a concept in our sources that suggests confidence in a language doesn't come from sitting in your room studying flashcards for another 100 hours.
No, it comes exclusively from interaction.
Yeah.
Which is a fundamental truth that a lot of learners try to avoid. We always want to feel completely ready before we speak.
Right. We ought to be perfect.
But there is a quote from the Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky that our sources highlight, which just frames this beautifully. Dostoevsky noted that we sometimes encounter people, perfect strangers, who begin to interest us at first sight suddenly and all at once before a single word has been spoken.
I love that quote because that concept completely challenges the typical language learner's mindset. We usually operate under this assumption that the stranger is inherently disinterested or even hostile to our presence.
Right. We think we're bothering them.
We think we have to perform this linguistic tap dance, like we have to say something incredibly witty or profound just to justify taking up their time. But Dostoevsky suggests that a baseline level of curiosity already exists.
And if we look at the sociology of public spaces, we are heavily conditioned to ignore each other. We put on our headphones, we stare at our screens, and we create these invisible bubbles. But beneath that modern conditioning, humans are highly social creatures. And to prove this point, our sources detail a rather brilliant social experiment. It was conducted by a media company called Soul Pancake.
Oh, I love this one.
Uh-huh.
They wanted to test the strength of those invisible social barriers.
Yeah. This is the ball pit experiment.
Right.
So they set up a massive adult-sized ball pit right in the middle of a super busy public pedestrian area. And they placed 2 chairs inside it and a sign inviting random strangers to sit in the pit together and answer conversation prompts that were written on the plastic balls.
See, I would imagine that in a busy city, people would actively avoid that. There's something about a ridiculous, colorful environment in the middle of a gray sidewalk that usually makes commuters just walk faster in the opposite direction.
Which was the initial hypothesis for a lot of observers.
Why?
But the actual outcome was quite the opposite. People did hesitate for a moment, sure, but once they stepped in, they engaged deeply. Within minutes, complete strangers were laughing. They were sharing highly personal anecdotes and forming genuine connections. The environment lowered their threat response.
So what's the takeaway there for an English learner?
The takeaway is that people are generally craving interaction. They want to connect, but they're waiting for someone else to lower the drawbridge. When you speak to a stranger, you aren't imposing on them. You are offering them a low-pressure invitation to break out of their own isolation.
I hear that. But let's look at the reality of the B2 learner's brain. It's really easy to say people want to talk to you when you're speaking your native language. But when you're speaking a second language, there's a massive internal hurdle.
Very true.
The AI Talk English source refers to this, and it ties back to how we're actually taught languages in school. It's the pursuit of the perfect English myth.
Yeah, the traditional education system has a lot to answer for in this regard. In a classroom, language is treated as this rigid mathematical formula. You take a test, and if you use the simple past instead of the present perfect, a teacher marks it with a red pen, and your grade drops. You're penalized for every single deviation from grammatical perfection. And this programs the learner to view conversations as examinations.
That red pen trauma is so real. You carry it with you into the real world. You approach a stranger in a park, and part of your brain thinks they're holding a metaphorical red pen.
Just waiting to deduct points.
Exactly. Ready to grade you if you misuse a preposition. You worry that if you don't use sufficiently complex vocabulary, they're going to think you're unintelligent.
But that's a profound cognitive distortion. In the real world outside of an academic setting, the goal of communication is the transfer of ideas. It's not the demonstration of syntax. The stranger at the bus stop is not an adjudicator. They're focused entirely on the narrative of what you are saying. If you say, I go to the store yesterday and I see a fire land, the native speaker is not mentally correcting your verb tense.
They're not thinking, oh, it should be went.
Exactly. Their brain bypasses the grammatical error entirely and focuses on the semantic meaning. There was a fire.
So trying to sound like a native speaker, which usually involves speaking incredibly fast and trying to use complicated idioms, is actually the wrong approach for a B2 learner.
It usually backfires spectacularly. When you rush to sound fluent, you increase your cognitive load, which then leads to stumbling mispronunciation and visible anxiety. And that makes the listener uncomfortable.
Right.
The sources explicitly point out that speaking slowly, clearly, and with simple vocabulary creates a far better impression. A relaxed demeanor communicates confidence much more effectively than rapid-fire complex grammar.
But speaking slowly introduces another terrifying element for the learner, the pause.
Ah, yes.
When you're translating a thought or searching for a specific noun, those 3 seconds of silence can feel like 3 hours of absolute failure. You feel like the conversation is just dying right in front of you.
It's crucial to reframe how we view silence. In many Western English-speaking cultures, silence in a conversation is perceived as awkward. But a short pause is a mechanical necessity for a B2 brain.
Because it's working so hard.
Exactly. Your brain is performing incredible neurological gymnastics. It's pulling a concept from your native language, finding the English equivalent, applying grammatical rules, and monitoring the social cues of the person you're talking to, all simultaneously. It needs processing time.
Reframing it is one thing, but how do you physically handle that silence without looking like your brain just shut down?
You claim the space. You don't just stare blankly. The transcripts advise using overt filler phrases to signal that the silence is intentional.
Like what?
You say, "Let me think for a moment." Or, "How should I put this?" accompanied by a relaxed smile or a nod. This achieves two things. First, it buys your brain the necessary seconds to retrieve the vocabulary.
Right.
Second, it demonstrates to the listener that you're fully engaged and thoughtfully considering your words rather than panicking.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Saying, how should I put this, actually makes you sound highly competent. It implies that your thoughts are so nuanced that you need a moment to select the perfect phrasing.
It's a great trick.
Okay, so we've addressed the internal mindset. We know the stranger isn't grading us, and we know how to handle a pause. But that still leaves the hardest part. How do you actually get the first words out of your mouth without sounding completely unnatural?
This requires a strategic approach to opening a dialogue. You don't want to just walk up to someone and say, "Hello, I am practicing my English."
Yeah, that's a bit intense.
It places a huge burden on them to become your temporary tutor. The transcripts from Mr. English outline a highly effective alternative which revolves around shared context and genuine compliments.
Let's break down the scenario from that transcript because I think it's super helpful. We have a speaker named Paul. He's sitting on a park bench. He wants to practice, and he sees a man sitting nearby with a small white dog. Paul doesn't introduce himself.
Yeah.
Instead, he looks at the dog and says, "What a beautiful dog he is, so cute."
Let's analyze the mechanics of why that opening works so well. When you offer a genuine compliment, you actually trigger the release of dopamine in the recipient's brain. Yes, dopamine is a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. By complimenting the dog, Paul has literally given the stranger a neurochemical reward for interacting with him.
Wow.
Furthermore, the compliment shifts the spotlight. The pressure is no longer on Paul's English proficiency. The focus is now entirely on the dog, which is a subject the stranger presumably loves and is very comfortable discussing.
And it works perfectly. The man responds positively, gives the dog's name, Buster. And Paul follows up with the easiest possible question. How old is he? It works seamlessly.
It does.
But I have to play devil's advocate here. Complimenting a dog at a park is essentially conversational easy mode.
That's fair.
People with dogs expect to be talked to. What if there is no dog? What if you're in a sterile environment like a grocery store aisle just staring at shelves?
That requires leveraging shared context rather than a direct compliment. There's another anecdote in the sources that addresses exactly this.
Oh, the bread aisle store.
Yes. A speaker named Emily is in a grocery store, standing in the bread aisle looking at sourdough. Another customer is standing next to her, looking equally indecisive. Emily doesn't introduce herself. She comments on the shared dilemma.
Right.
She says the bread here is so good, but it's hard to choose right.
That is a very different approach. She isn't complimenting the person. She is validating a shared experience.
Precisely. It builds instant situational rapport. By acknowledging a minor shared frustration, in this case the overwhelming variety of bread, she creates a temporary in-group.
Us against the bread.
Exactly. It becomes the two of them versus the problem of choosing bread. The stranger replies, "Yes, I want something for sandwiches, but I don't know which one is fresh." The ice is completely broken without any formal awkward introduction.
However, our ESL guides come with some severe warning labels about initiating conversations. While commenting on bread or dogs is safe, there are cultural taboos that B2 learners need to memorize.
Because crossing these lines can instantly turn a friendly chat into a deeply offensive encounter.
Cultural fluency is just as important as linguistic fluency. The guides clearly delineate safe topics from danger zones.
They do.
Safe topics in most English-speaking cultures are external and universally experienced. The weather sports, commuting traffic, or general hobbies. Asking, "Did you get caught in that rainstorm earlier?" is universally constable.
But the danger zones, the taboos, are highly personal. The big three to avoid are age, weight, and salary.
Right.
The guide warns against asking, "How old are you?" or "How much rent do you pay?" even if those topics might be considered completely normal small talk in your native culture.
The topic of weight and physical appearance is particularly fraught, isn't it?
Highly fraught. In some cultures, telling someone they look like they've lost weight or even gained weight might be an observation of health or prosperity.
Hmm.
In Western English-speaking cultures, saying, have you put on weight or even you look so skinny is an invasion of privacy.
Yeah, people get very defensive.
It's often interpreted as an aggressive critique. It is a boundary you simply do not cross with an acquaintance.
So stick to the weather and the bread until you know them better.
Definitely.
Now, assuming you've navigated the opening successfully, how do you elevate the tone? This brings us to a tool that I found genuinely surprising in our stack of sources: humor.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, the Let's Roam compendium of over 120 icebreaker jokes.
At first glance, a list of cheesy internet puns seems completely out of place in a serious discussion about language acquisition. But when you dissect the mechanics of a pun, it reveals itself as a high-level linguistic exercise.
Okay, let's look at a few examples from the list to see how they actually work. Here's one. How do you make a hot dog stand? Steal its chair.
Classic.
Here's another. What do you call an alligator in a vest? An investigator. And one more. Why are penguins socially awkward? They find it difficult to break the ice. Now, I read these and I groan. They're classic dad jokes. But why is this actually good for a B2 learner?
Because puns are structural traps. They rely entirely on double meanings, homophones, and precise phonetics. Let's take the alligator joke. The humor, such as it is, relies on the listener recognizing the phonetic overlap between the phrase investigator and the noun investigator.
Right.
To deliver that joke successfully, a B2 learner has to master English pronunciation and cadence. If you put the wrong emphasis on the syllables, the joke falls completely flat and makes no sense.
So practicing these jokes out loud is basically a workout for your vocal inflection. You have to learn comedic timing, which requires a really deep understanding of the rhythm of English speech.
Exactly. It forces you to move beyond just reading words on a page and into the musicality of the language. Furthermore, deploying a mild groan-inducing pun in a real conversation is a brilliant disarming tactic.
How so?
If you tell that penguin joke to someone at a networking event, they're going to laugh, even if it's just a pity laugh. But more importantly, it signals vulnerability. You're showing that you don't take yourself too seriously, which instantly relaxes the other person.
It breaks the tension. Okay, so we've successfully initiated contact. We
Yeah.
complimented the dog. We avoided asking about their salary. And we maybe dropped a terrible joke about an alligator.
Doing great so far.
The conversation is alive. But how do we keep it from dying a minute later? How do we sustain the flow? The core strategy highlighted in our sources is something called the Me Too technique.
Right. And while calling it a technique might sound overly clinical, it's actually a fundamental social reflex that we all utilize in our native languages.
We just forget to do it in English.
Exactly. The challenge is remembering to deploy it when our brains are overloaded with translating. Let's look back at the grocery store scenario with Emily.
Okay.
After they discuss the bread, Emily asks the stranger, Sarah, an open question. Do you like cooking? Sarah replies that she loves making Italian food. Emily's immediate response is, wow, me too. I love pasta.
That Me Too moment, the pasta bond, it seems so rudimentary, almost like something a child would say on a playground. But it works.
It works because of in-group and out-group psychology. When we meet a stranger, our brains instinctively categorize them as part of the out-group. There's a slight biological wariness.
Yeah.
By enthusiastically saying, me too, you are actively rewriting that categorization. You are identifying a shared trait or passion which moves the stranger from the out-group into your in-group. You are now a micro-community of people who appreciate Italian cuisine.
It provides a foundation to build upon. Instead of scrambling for a totally new topic, the conversation can now naturally deepen along this shared interest. You can ask about their favorite recipes or if they make their own pasta dough.
Yes.
But finding that common ground requires the right kind of questioning. Our ESL sources draw a very sharp distinction between open-ended and closed questions.
This is a critical tactical error many learners make. If you're nervous, you tend to ask closed questions because they are grammatically simpler.
Right, you asked, do you like art?
And the stranger replies, yes. And the conversation hits a brick wall. A closed question allows for a one-word answer, which puts the burden right back on you to come up with the next topic.
It basically turns the conversation into an interrogation. To sustain flow, you have to invite a narrative. Instead of, do you like art? You ask, what kind of art are you drawn to? Or what did you think of the new exhibit downtown?
Exactly.
This requires the other person to formulate an opinion and share a story, giving you a wealth of information to find your Me Too connection.
And while they are delivering that narrative, your job is not to just stand there silently, internally translating your next sentence. This is where active listening, specifically the use of back channeling, becomes essential.
Backchanneling is making those little listening noises, right? Saying, mm-hmm, oh, wow, or I see.
Yes, and the cultural context here is so important. In some cultures, making noises while someone else is speaking is considered an interruption. It's a sign of disrespect.
But not in English.
No, in Western English-speaking dynamics, a lack of back-channeling is often interpreted as a lack of interest or comprehension. The speaker might think they don't understand me and just stop talking.
Oh, wow.
Making those small, affirming noises proves you are tracking their narrative. Crucially for the B2 learner, these noises provide conversational cover.
Conversational cover.
Yeah, while you're nodding and saying that's interesting, your brain is utilizing those seconds to process their vocabulary and formulate your next open-ended question.
That is brilliant. Speaking of formulating sentences, this is the perfect time to bring in the guide from Leiden University.
Yes, the podcasting guide.
This was the source that initially confused me the most. It's a manual from their Center for Innovation on how to produce an educational podcast. It talks about microphone technique, audio editing, and script writing.
Right.
How does writing a podcast script translate to talking to a stranger in a coffee shop?
It's an unexpected connection, but a brilliant one. The Leiden Guide outlines specific rules for writing text that is meant to be spoken aloud rather than read silently on a page. The cognitive constraints of listening to a podcast are very similar to the cognitive constraints of a B2 conversation.
The rule that stood out the most to me was the sentence length constraint. The guide emphatically advises keeping spoken sentences to around 10 words.
Yes.
When I read that, it was a massive light bulb moment. Think about how we usually try to speak a second language. We formulate a massive, complex, paragraph-long thought in our native language, full of subordinate clauses and caveats.
We build a whole architecture.
Right. Then we try to translate that entire architectural structure into English as we are speaking it.
And inevitably, the structure collapses. When you try to construct a 40-word sentence in real time at a B2 level, your working memory gets overloaded. You lose track of the subject, you mix up the verb tenses, you run out of breath, and you end up trailing off into an awkward silence. The Leiden Guide points out that long sentences held together by excessive commas or run-on conjunctions, and they're exhausting for the speaker to deliver and exhausting for the listener to follow.
So the trick is to treat your spontaneous speech like a mini broadcast script. You break your complex thought into short, punchy 10-word chunks.
Exactly.
Instead of saying, I went to the store yesterday because I needed to buy ingredients for a cake that I am baking for my friend's birthday tomorrow, you break it down.
How would you do it?
You say, I went to the store yesterday, I needed baking ingredients, my friend has a birthday tomorrow, I am making a cake.
It sounds slightly staccato when we analyze it here, but in natural conversation, it comes across as clear, confident, and rhythmic. It prevents grammatical panic because you're only managing a few words at a time.
It's so much more manageable.
The Leiden Guide also offers a psychological linguistic tweak. They recommend replacing passive isolating language with what they call community words.
So swapping out words like I and they for we and together.
Exactly. This is particularly effective in a professional or networking context. If you're discussing an industry challenge, saying, how do you think we can navigate this together, creates a subtle but profound psychological shift.
You're linguistically inviting them onto your team.
Yes. It's a minor vocabulary choice that yields massive collaborative dividends. It makes you sound not just fluent, but socially adept.
All right, so we've equipped our listener with an incredible toolkit. They know how to open with context. They are asking open-ended questions, they're back-channeling, and they are keeping their sentences to a crisp 10 words.
Doing everything right.
The conversation is humming along beautifully. But we have to address the reality of language learning. Things are going to go wrong. Misunderstandings will happen.
They are an absolute certainty. And the mark of conversational mastery is not the absence of mistakes, but the grace with which you handle them.
Right?
How you navigate a sudden bump in the road defines the interaction far more than your flawless use of the past perfect tense.
There is a hilariously painful story in the Mr. English transcripts that illustrates this perfectly. It is a lesson in the power of vulnerability.
Oh, the tea story.
Yes. Let's go back to Paul. The guy who complimented Buster the dog in the park.
Right.
So he and the stranger have been chatting for a while.
Yeah.
Paul is feeling incredibly confident. His English is flowing. He decides it is time to leave, so he stands up dramatically to say goodbye. But he completely forgets that he placed his hot cup of tea on the ground right next to his foot.
Oh, Oh, no.
He steps forward and kicks the cup. Hot tea goes flying everywhere, splashing all over his own shoes and the pavement.
It's the physical manifestation of losing control. For a language learner who is already hyper-aware of their performance and desperately trying to project competence, doing something clumsy feels catastrophic.
The instinct is to be overwhelmed by shame, apologize profusely, and just run away.
Def-
But the narrative in the transcript shows a totally different outcome. The stranger didn't laugh at him or judge him. The stranger was startled, laughed kindly, and immediately asked if Paul was burned or if he needed napkins.
And Paul, to his immense credit, didn't panic.
No, he didn't. He just looked at his soaked shoes, laughed at himself, and said, well, I'm a bit clumsy today.
That reaction is a masterclass in diffusing tension. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as the pratfall effect.
The pratfall effect.
Yes. It suggests that highly competent individuals become more likable when they make a minor mistake or display clumsiness. Perfection can be intimidating and alienating.
I could see that.
By kicking the tea and laughing about it, Paul demonstrated that he is a flawed, authentic human being. Vulnerability is universally endearing.
That perfectly segues into another story from the transcripts dealing not with physical clumsiness, but with linguistic collision. This is the story of the bats.
This is a great one.
A language learner is at a loud, crowded party. He's introduced to a woman named Anna. The music is loud, the pressure is on, and Anna says to him, I really like bats.
Context and translation speed are everything in this scenario.
Right, so the learner's brain hears the word bats, rapidly searches its mental dictionary, and pulls up the primary translation, the flying mammals. The nocturnal creatures that live in caves and are associated with vampires. He wants to keep the conversation flowing. He wants to use the me too, or at least a validating technique. So he replies, wow, that is unusual. I think they're a bit scary, but they are cool.
Which is a perfectly logical and syntactically correct response based on his internal translation.
But Anna looks at him with utter confusion. The conversation grinds to a halt. She looks at him and says, scary. Why is a piece of wood scary?
The realization moment.
Yep. She was talking about baseball bats, sporting equipment. He was talking about flying mammals.
A total disconnect. He thought she had a weird obsession with cave animals, and she thought he had a bizarre phobia of sporting goods.
Now, in the moment, that feels like a humiliating failure of vocabulary. But what was the actual result?
According to the source, once they figured out the translation error, they didn't politely change the subject. They laughed about the absurdity of the misunderstanding for 5 minutes straight.
It broke down every social barrier between them.
The transcript notes that Anna is still one of his closest friends, and the scary wood became a permanent inside joke.
It totally reframes the entire concept of a mistake. We fear misunderstandings because we think they prove we're incompetent. But this story proves that a misunderstanding is actually an opportunity.
It is a spark for humor and shared laughter.
Tripping over a word doesn't ruin the interaction. It often provides the exact moment of levity needed to turn a polite, sterile chat into a genuine human connection.
So we embrace the spilled tea and the linguistic mix-ups. However, there's one conversational scenario that remains incredibly daunting, even if you are comfortable with making mistakes.
What's that?
It's what many learners consider the boss level of B2 English, the group conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Talking to one patient native speaker who is giving you their full attention is one thing. But stepping into a circle of 3 or 4 native speakers at a party or a work function is a completely different beast.
It really is.
They are talking over each other, firing off cultural idioms, laughing at inside jokes, and speaking at twice the normal speed. It's a chaotic environment.
The cognitive load in a group dynamic is exponential.
Yeah.
You aren't just translating one person's speech, you're tracking multiple overlapping narratives and trying to find an entry point.
The instinct for many learners is to simply become a silent observer, smiling and nodding for an hour without ever speaking a word.
Right. But the Learn English B2 guide provides a specific tactical approach to conquering this dynamic.
The guide says the first rule is do not rush in.
Correct. Your first phase should be active observation. You need to identify the rhythm and the tone of the group. Are they having a serious, structured debate about politics, or are they lightly roasting each other over a recent movie?
You have to match the energetic frequency of the group before you contribute. Okay, so you've observed. You understand the topic. You have formulated a relevant 10-word sentence in your head. How do you physically break into that wall of sound without seeming rude or interrupting someone mid-thought?
You don't break the wall, you use a side door. The smoothest on-ramp into a group dynamic is validation.
Validation.
You wait for a speaker to finish a thought, and in that split-second pause, you validate them. You say, that is an interesting point, Jake. It reminds me of, or I completely agree with Lisa's perspective on that. And I would add,
That is incredibly strategic. By using their name and validating their specific point, you aren't interrupting the flow of the conversation. You are attaching your thought to their momentum.
yes. You instantly make an ally out of the person who just spoke, which makes the rest of the group much more receptive to your addition.
But we also have to prepare for the inevitable hurdle of group dynamics, the interruption. Let's say you successfully enter the conversation. You're halfway through your sentence, and another native speaker gets excited and talks right over you.
It happens constantly in English-speaking cultures, often without any malicious intent at all.
But for a language learner, being talked over can completely shatter your confidence. The natural reaction is to just shrink back, apologize internally, and stay quiet for the rest of the evening. You feel like your English wasn't fast enough or interesting enough to hold the floor.
Which is why the guide provides specific phrasing to reclaim your conversational space without escalating the situation into an argument. You don't need to raise your voice or show anger.
What do you say?
When the interrupter takes a breath, you simply project your voice slightly and say, just to finish my point, or if I could just complete my thought.
Just finish my point. It's firm, it's polite, but it sets a boundary.
Exactly. It signals to the group that you recognize your own value in the conversation and you intend to be heard. It requires a burst of assertiveness, but mastering that single phrase can revolutionize how you experience group interactions. You're no longer a passive participant, you are an equal contributor.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground. We know how to open, how to sustain, how to laugh at our mistakes, and how to survive a group of loud native speakers. But there is one final, crucial phase of any interaction.
Eventually, the conversation has to end.
And this brings us to a major, often unspoken anxiety for language learners. You muster the courage to initiate a conversation. It goes well for 5 minutes, but then you exhaust your vocabulary.
Or perhaps the other person is just a chronic oversharer.
Right, and you feel entirely trapped. In your native language, you know exactly how to politely excuse yourself. But in English, you lack the nuanced phrasing, and you fear that just walking away will seem incredibly rude.
This fear of being trapped prevents many learners from ever saying hello in the first place. If you don't know how to get off the ride, you won't buy a ticket.
Which is where our source by Farley Ledgerwood becomes invaluable. Ledgerwood spent 35 years working in a corporate insurance office, an environment that is practically a laboratory for long, inescapable conversations.
He really tested these in the field.
He did. He outlines 9 specific techniques used by socially adept people to end interactions gracefully. We're going to examine each of these so you can build your own exit strategy toolkit.
Let's analyze them sequentially. Technique number 1 is what Ledgerwood calls the positive summary close. This involves summarizing the interaction with enthusiasm, specifically utilizing the past tense to subtly signal that the event has concluded.
For example, saying this has been a really helpful chat. I love your perspective on the new software. The phrase has been is the operational key there. It communicates that the value of the conversation has been achieved and it is now structurally complete.
Precisely. Technique number 2 is the future commitment. This is where you say something like, let's definitely continue this debate over coffee next week. However, Ledgerwood attaches a severe cultural warning to this technique.
Yes, the warning is, do not say this if you are lying.
Exactly. In some cultures, suggesting a future meeting is just a polite fiction used to soften a goodbye. And even in American English, a vague "we should catch up sometime" is often understood as a pleasantry without obligation.
But when you attach a specific parameter like next week or over coffee, you create a genuine expectation.
If you use this merely as an escape hatch and then ignore their follow-up texts, you actively damage your reputation and credibility.
Right.
Use it only when sincere.
Moving to technique number 3, this is arguably the oldest and most universally understood maneuver, the bathroom excuse. Simply saying, would you excuse me for a moment? I need to find the restroom.
It is the ultimate trump card because it appeals to an unquestionable biological necessity. Social norms dictate that no one can argue with this excuse or demand further details. It provides a clean, immediate, physical break from the interaction.
Are there any caveats?
The only caveat Ledgerwood notes is that you cannot use this excuse 3 times with the same person at the same networking event, or it loses its plausibility.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Technique number 4 is highly strategic, particularly in professional or social settings. It is the introduction redirect. This is where you engineer an exit by bringing a third party into the dynamic.
How does that work?
You say, oh, you're interested in graphic design. You absolutely have to meet Sarah over there. Let me introduce you to.
This is a highly sophisticated networking maneuver. By connecting two other people, you elevate your own status as a facilitator who adds value to the room.
Right.
Simultaneously, as they begin to engage with each other, you provide yourself with an elegant, unnoticed exit. You solve their conversational needs while fulfilling your own need to leave.
Number 5 is the honest time constraint. This relies on transparency and boundaries. You look at your watch and say, I'm so sorry to cut this fascinating story short, but I promised my daughter I would pick her up at 3:00. Or I have a hard stop for a Zoom call in 5 minutes.
The effectiveness of this technique lies in its externalization of the blame. You are communicating that you want to stay, but external obligations force you to leave.
People generally respect clearly stated boundaries. It is a rejection of the circumstance, not a rejection of the person.
Technique number 6 is the callback technique. This is a wonderfully flattering way to leave. It involves referencing a specific recommendation or point they made earlier in the conversation and tying it to an immediate action.
For instance, the documentary you mentioned about deep-sea diving sounds incredible. I'm going to go write that down right now before I forget.
It leaves the other person feeling highly validated. You're demonstrating that you listened closely to their input and value it enough to take immediate action. It ends the interaction on a note of high mutual respect.
Number 7 is my absolute favorite, especially for those long, draining interactions at the end of a long day. Ledgerwood calls it the energy acknowledgement. You say this has been a fantastic conversation, but I can tell my brain is starting to fade a bit. Should we call it a night?
It is an act of conversational heroism. In many prolonged interactions, both parties are actually exhausted and want to leave, but neither wants to risk appearing rude by initiating the departure.
Good.
By acknowledging the shared drop in energy, you validate their fatigue as well as your own. You give both of you permission to walk away without guilt.
Number 8 is the task transition. This is similar to the time constraint, but focused on immediate action. You say, I should probably go help the host with those dishes before they pile up in the sink. Or I need to go refresh my drink.
It signals momentum. You are not fleeing the conversation. You are transitioning toward a specific responsibility or destination.
And finally, technique number 9, the gratitude exit. It is the simplest and perhaps the most elegant. You look them in the eye, smile, and say, thank you so much for taking the time to share that story with me. I really appreciate it.
It requires no elaborate excuses, no references to time, and no fictional tasks. It simply concludes the interaction with a definitive statement of appreciation. It is clean and respectful.
Ledgerwood's overarching point about these 9 exits is profound. Knowing how to end a conversation is what actually gives you the courage to start one. When you realize that you possess the linguistic tools to set polite boundaries and escape whenever you need to, the anxiety of being trapped vanishes. You are in control of your own conversational destiny.
And that control is the ultimate antidote to the fear that keeps B2 learners silent.
Let's take a moment to look back at the immense journey we have charted today. We began by dismantling the psychological barrier of the stranger using Dostoevsky and a public ball pit to prove that humans actually crave connection, and that your English doesn't need to be perfect to provide that connection.
We then explored the mechanics of breaking the ice, utilizing contextual observations about sourdough bread, the neurochemical power of complimenting a dog, and the phonetic workout of delivering a terrible pun about an alligator.
We learned how to keep the fire burning with the Me Too in-group reflex, the strategic use of open-ended questions, and the vital importance of back-channeling noises. We also borrowed a brilliant trick from a Leiden University podcasting guide, learning to manage our cognitive load by speaking in rhythmic 10-word sentences and utilizing community language.
We discussed the pratfall effect, embracing the vulnerability of spilled tea and the humor in mistaking baseball equipment for vampire bats. We conquered the chaotic dynamics of group conversations by validating others and politely reclaiming our right to speak. And finally, we armed ourselves with 9 foolproof strategies to exit an interaction gracefully and respectfully.
It is a massive, comprehensive toolkit designed to get you off the intermediate plateau and into the real world. But if we must synthesize all of these sources, anecdotes, and strategies into a single overarching philosophy for the language learner, it is this. English is just a tool. It is not a test of your intelligence, and it is not a metric of your worth.
The ultimate goal of language is not grammatical perfection. The goal is human connection. The strangers you encounter do not care if you stumble over the present perfect continuous tense. They care if you are warm, if you are engaged, and if you are authentic. Every single time you push past that initial spike of anxiety and open your mouth to speak, you are building a bridge between your world and theirs.
The grammar will inevitably smooth itself out through practice. But the connections, the shared laughs, the shared stories, those happen right now in the messy, imperfect reality of B2 English. I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you navigate your week. Think back to the stories we analyzed today. The guy kicking his tea all over his shoes, the absolute confusion over the word bats. If the most memorable, endearing, and connection-building parts of a conversation are the shared laughs born out of clumsy mistakes, what if your absolute biggest failure in English is actually the exact spark that ignites your next great friendship? Don't hide from the mistakes. Step into the coffee shop, look that stranger in the eye, say hello, and let the messy, beautiful conversation unfold.